Hi, Euros. Our very first lecture is going to be on the difference between primary and secondary sources. Throughout the years we study European history, we will use a variety of sources to tell us about the past. Some of these will be written sources, such as your textbook, and others will be visual sources, such as artwork or pictures. The sources that we use can be classified as either primary or secondary sources. Primary sources are artifacts, documents, recordings, or other sources that were created at the period under study. They are first-hand, direct accounts of an event or a time period. For example, the Declaration of Independence is a direct account of the Revolutionary War from the people who were actually there declaring independence. Historians use primary sources to learn about the past from the people who are actually there. There are many types of primary sources. Primary sources can be written sources, such as books, like The Prince by Machiavelli. They could be diaries or journals. They can be letters, such as this letter written by Marie Antoinette. They can be political documents, like the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States. Primary sources can also be visual sources, such as paintings, or other forms of art like sculpture. They can be architecture. They can be political cartoons. Advertisements, like this extremely misogynistic ad from the 1950s. If you don't know what misogynistic is, look it up. They can be propaganda, like this poster from World War I, encouraging people to join the army. In the case of more modern times, movies, YouTube videos would also be considered primary sources. What makes something a primary source is the fact that it is created by someone with first-hand knowledge of the period or event under study. All that summer work that you completed, that is a primary source that could tell future historians how the awesome students at DBHS prepared for AP Euro. So if all of these are primary sources, what do you think a secondary source is? That's right, it's anything that isn't a first-hand account. Your textbook is a secondary source. Spielvogel read a whole bunch of primary sources and maybe read some other secondary sources and compiled that information to create a textbook about Western civilization. A biography of a famous or a not-so-famous person would be a secondary source. Newspapers can be both a primary and a secondary source. If the article was written by someone who was actually present at the event being written about, it is considered a primary source. However, if the author of the newspaper article interviewed eyewitnesses and then wrote about the event without their own first-hand knowledge, it is considered a secondary source. As AP Euro historians, it's important that you learn how to use both types of sources to learn about the past. Secondary sources, like your textbook, generally are more straightforward and easier to comprehend. I will also help you in your comprehension by giving you questions and terms to identify to help you understand what it is you're reading. Primary sources, other times, we will use something called a parts chart. A parts chart helps you to identify and analyze the key elements of a primary source. A parts is an acronym. Each letter is going to stand for one element of the source. So the first thing you're going to look at with a primary source, and this can be any of those written sources like a letter or a diary, or it could be painting, or it could be propaganda. This can be used for a visual or a text source. The first thing you look at is the author. You're going to look at the author. Who created it? Who wrote it? Who sculpted it? Who drew it? Okay. Who is the author? The second thing you're going to look at is the place and time. When and where was it written? Under what circumstances was it written? Okay. Next, you're going to use your prior knowledge of the author and of the place and time to help you kind of prepare your mind for reading it so that you know what to expect out of the document. What do you already know about the author? What do you already know about the place and time this document is from? Okay, so you're kind of activating your brain to say, okay, what can I expect from this document? The fourth thing you're going to look at is the audience. Who is it written for? Who is it created for? The audience is significant because we say and write different things depending on who our audience is. So the first A, the first P, the second P, and the second A, the APA part of a parts, okay, is all kind of completed before you actually start analyzing the document. Okay, this is your background knowledge that you can get just by looking at the document and looking at the source information. The last three parts, reason, the main idea, and significance, are more analytical. They require a little bit more critical thinking. For reason, you're going to think about why the document was created at this time, at the time period it was written. What was the author's purpose? What was the author trying to achieve in creating this artifact? The main idea is simply going to be, what is it about? Okay. What is the document saying? What's the main idea or point that the author is making? What is the meaning of it? And lastly, significance. Why is the document important? Why is this document significant to the time or place it is from? And how does it fit in contextually? By completing a parts chart, by identifying these 7 elements of a document, you are learning how to analyze that document and use that document to teach you about history. When we read a primary source in class, frequently you're going to need to identify a parts for the document that helps you understand it. Thanks for listening to our very first lecture. Tomorrow in class, we're going to have a chance to apply everything you learned here. Woohoo! I can't wait. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great night or morning, depending on where you are, when you are, I guess, listening to this. Sources, like your textbook, generally are more straightforward and easier to comprehend. As you read your text throughout the year, you will answer questions and identify terms to help with your learning. Primary sources can be a bit more challenging. When we use primary sources, sometimes we will have questions to answer to aid in comprehension. Other times we will use something called an